I'm David Frankel. I'd like to talk today about a Bronze Age jug. We see it in the picture. Not, of course, just this jug, but other associated items, and to think about what they can tell us about the people who made it, and indeed the people who discovered it. The jug itself we would refer to now as a red polished 3-ware jug, and ascribe it to the earlier part of the Middle Bronze Age in Cyprus. That is, about 4,000 years ago, maybe a little bit less. But that's what we can impose on it. The jug itself can tell us a lot. We can see its size, its shape, its colour. We can see added decoration. We can see how it's made. It was, in fact, highly polished before firing to bring out a strong, lustrous red-brown colour. It has a tall, cutaway spout, ideal for pouring. It was probably used for containing liquid and pouring it. Water, maybe wine, perhaps even oil. We can see little embellishments, knobs at the front and back and at the neck base, an incised decoration on the back of the handle and on a little ridge in the front of the neck. We can look at the nature of its fabric. It is in fact a sort of medium quality fabric with many small, tiny black and white inclusions in it. It's fairly hard, but not very hard fired, and so on. We get an idea of technology of manufacture and ideas, general ideas about its function. But of course, that's what we can see on this particular vessel itself. We need to think about the broader context. Well, at the moment, this jug, number 415, as we've seen, lives in the Cyprus Museum in Nicosia. But we need to think about how it got there. It comes from a small site on a high hill, you see in the photograph, overlooking the Bay of Morphou in the west of Cyprus. In 1942, the Hellenic Mining Company were undertaking copper mining in Cyprus. Cyprus, as an island, is synonymous with copper. And in some of their shafts or agates, they discovered evidence of Bronze Age mining. There were pottery sherds identified as from the Middle Bronze Age, red polished pottery like our jug number 415, and some other items. This was very unusual. And metallurgy, mining, copperworking was something of particular interest to Cypriot archaeologists. The people from the Hellenic Mining Company reported it to the Cyprus Museum, where Porphyrios Dikalos was then the acting director during the war years. Dikalos was a leading Cypriot archaeology, a significant figure in the history of the archaeology of the island. His own administrative and other duties prevented him from going to the site very much, but he saw the importance of it and sent a team, well-trained, very experienced excavators from the Department of Antiquities to investigate the site. Most of the field work was conducted by Kakoulis Yoriou. And we see here some of the scenes of people at work. It looks a little chaotic, but in fact was very well documented in terms of plans and the collection of the material, which was later taken back to the Cyprus Museum and carefully conserved, broken pieces, mended, and so on. The excavations took a number of forms. There were small test excavations across the area, and then two main areas of greater promise were opened up. Area 1, the one that's best known to Cypriot archaeologists until recently, can be identified as a copperworking workshop where metal from the mine was processed. It's important and interesting in that regard, but it's not our subject today. It may be something for another time. Area 2, to the north, is what we'll mainly think about. This was not a part of the site well known to Cypriot archaeologists, or indeed known very much at all. It was never fully published, or essentially not published at all. Now, Dikalos himself had published major, very substantial reports on some of his very substantial excavations on the north coast at an early Bronze Age site, and then earlier periods, for he was in fact responsible for establishing the basis of the earlier prehistory of Cyprus, much of which was reported in his main contribution to a review volume of the Swedish Cyprus expedition, volume 41A, published in 1962. But Ambelikou, a small site, important, but not a site he had a great personal investment in, was essentially neglected. Archaeologists knew of it, mainly because of the evidence of metalworking, but knew no details beyond the fact that there was evidence there. Then, in the 1980s, Robert Merrilees thought the situation needed to be rectified and started a program of bringing together what evidence he could, the documentation on the site, and so on. And he brought into this project Anne Elizabeth Dunn-Vetturi. And they worked intermittently on this material for many years, probably about 20 years. It became clear they would never be able to complete it in the way it should be done. And so Robert encouraged, persuaded Dr. Jenny Webb and I to undertake the project, to take it over, and to work up the material for publication. We eventually persuaded to do this, and then with the support of the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus, we're able to undertake all the research, the detailed research on the archives and on the material stored in the museum. Now, excavations always turn up surprises. If we knew exactly what we'd find, then perhaps we wouldn't bother to excavate. So we didn't really expect surprises from all this documentation, but we were really quite surprised to see pictures like these. They show an array of pots scattered across a floor. It's a catastrophic abandonment, a single day, a single hour in the life of this particular part of the site. Things left in position. This is highly unusual in excavations. We have only a few such examples. So this was very exciting. What was it? Why did we have so many pieces of pottery, whole pots, scattered across this single floor? An opportunity to see a snapshot of a particular point in time. What we have, in fact, as we see on the plan, is indeed a scatter of pots across the surface of this particular building. There are larger pots and smaller ones, but the majority are all very similar. They look something like this. So what was it? What was the building? How was this material scattered? Why was it so? Many of these items were burnt. In the plan, we've coloured the more heavily burnt ones red, the lesser burnt ones orange, and so on. So there was burning, there was fire, there was a catastrophic destruction. Was it an earthquake? Was it an accident? What caused this? But then, of particular interest were the items. We've, of course, seen a jug like this. Our jug 415 is one of them. But in fact, there's some 4 dozen jugs of this sort across that surface, including our jug 415. Here we see in context of all the others. So what was this? It was immediately a challenge to understand it, and also we see the opportunities this gives us to look at this one moment in time and this one unusual circumstance. Now, Dikalos, although he never published the site fully, did mention it in a general article he published in 1946, Wartime Discoveries in the Earliest Bronze Age in Cyprus. There he reported for a general audience some of the important discoveries made on the earliest Bronze Age, but also referred to the site at Ambelikou. He illustrated some of the items from the copper processing site, Area 1, a crucible, a mould. And he also included a photograph. You can't see it very well. Enlarged, we see it, with a caption underneath, site at Ambelikou, showing the potter's shop with a kiln in the right corner. Now, I've been involved in studying Cypriot Bronze Age pottery for many, many years, too many years perhaps. And to my shame, I'd really neglected or not identified the importance of the site from this one brief report. And really, no one else had either. Without the detailed documentation and presentation, there was not much we could have done with it other than know that Dikalos thought that this was a potter's shop. And as he also explained in the text of this general article, the excavations uncovered a small area of the settlement, including a potter's workshop, with, in one of the corners, a primitive kiln for baking pots. So our catastrophic abandonment is in fact the destruction of a potter's workshop. The jugs we've seen, perhaps the last kiln load, stacked after firing, and then some accident occurred. The workshop burnt down, leaving the material to be found by Dikalos and his colleagues. The kiln itself, one wouldn't automatically have identified as a kiln. Dikalos must have had some other evidence for this, but we don't have that documentation or information. Maybe there was the evidence of firing within it and other items. It doesn't look like a kiln, it's a rectangular stone structure, but there are kilns like this. The Australian ceramicist Owen Rye has documented similar looking kilns in Pakistan. So here we have a Bronze Age kiln, and we have the evidence of the last event that took place in this workshop. We have other evidence on that floor. On the left-hand side in the foreground, a long rectangular lump of clay. These must be pieces of clay ready to hand. The potter was going to prepare the next set of pots, and a circular plaster area, perhaps a clean area for working, and other items of stone and large jars, which we can use to reconstruct, at least in our minds, or what we would like to think the workshop was like. Perhaps it was something like this. Perhaps, of course, it was never so clean and neat and tidy in real life. But we see, from the evidence we have, large stone basins, jars for containing water, the clean circular workshop area, and then in the background, the kiln. So we can suggest this is our workshop, the roof catching fire, this racks of pottery collapsing and scattered across the floor. An interesting, extremely unusual thing to work on. So, what did we need to do? We needed to document all that material in detail, and this took us to the Cyprus Museum, and we'll go inside the museum, where the Department of Antiquity staff had carefully curated all that material for so many years, and then generously provided us with access to it. There's pots like our Jug 415 and the other similar ones to be looked at. But there's also an array of all the other items from the site, not just the pottery workshop, but the metallurgy area and items from broader afield. There are the large storage jars, basins. There are other types of pots of various sorts and cooking pots. So it's an entire suite of material, although here our interest is on that manufacturing workshop. So we got busy documenting each of the pots and other items, recording in detail all the aspects of the surface, the fabric, the size, the shape, taking photographs, and then also drawing all the pots, accurate proportion drawings, formal drawings, to give an idea of the size, shape and nature of the vessels, both for our own use and then in our final publication to make it available for all our colleagues and for others to assess the information and rework it in the future. So here we have this unique opportunity. All these jugs from a single surface, a single event, perhaps made by the same person, but certainly made in the same workshop, made in the same time, within the same few weeks and days, fired in the single firing, an opportunity to explore aspects otherwise we would never see of a single point in time, and to assess interesting aspects of manufacturing processes. We can look at the array of jugs we have, and you can see in the sample of them, they're all a little bit different from one another, although made perhaps by one person, perhaps over a short period of time. Nevertheless, while generally similar, some have more knobs on them than others. Some have taller necks. Some have straighter spouts. Some are slightly more globular, others less so. Unfortunately, because many are burnt, we can't look at aspects of colour, but we can see all these other aspects. Although uniform to a great extent, nevertheless there's a degree of individuality. The potter, or group of potters, weren't concerned with a high degree of standardization. They enjoyed a little bit of variability. They liked to change things around a little bit. And we can use that information to see the degree of variability within this one kiln load, this one working episode. Generally speaking, there are two sizes of jugs. Very small ones, about half a litre in volume. And then the majority are about 2 litres, the amount you'd find in a 2-litre milk bottle. A little bit of variation, mostly between 1.5 and 2.5 litres. So there's some degree of standardization in volume and two main sizes of vessels. We can look at the variability in jug proportions. We can see down towards the bottom left the smaller vessels, and then the larger ones slightly more varied. And we now have the information as a baseline to compare to other assemblages of pottery as we try to assess the nature of manufacturing, degree of standardization, the quality control, if you like, that different societies, different pottery traditions had when they were making their vessels. But we can also look at our jugs and all the other material, all the other pottery from the site in another way. We can make use of some of the more modern technologies that allow us to give different insights into the past. In this case, we were able to take advantage of a fairly recently developed technology. X-ray fluorescence has been used for many years in archaeology for assessing the mineral content and composition, the chemistry of material. The more recent development of portable tools for doing so has revolutionized many aspects of archaeology. It can process, using it, we can process very large numbers of samples relatively quickly and obtain information about the elemental composition. It can be taken into museums because it's portable, and importantly, it's non-destructive. So we were able to measure the chemical composition of very large quantities of pottery, including all our jugs. Here we see this analysis applied to red polished vessels from 3 sites. Our site at Ambelikou, blue, and 2 other sites that we had access to material from. And we can see that their chemical composition, when plotted in this particular way, varies considerably. Quite clearly, the technique works at separating out clays from different parts of the island. If we look just at the red polished pottery from Ambelikou, the type of pottery of our Jug 415 and similar types, we can see there are two main varieties of clays. The majority, plotted in red on this diagram, but then some others, less uniform in clay composition, of finer wares, where the fabric is much finer for incision. They're smaller, better quality vessels. These are perhaps not made in that workshop or at Ambelikou, but may have been imported to the site from areas to the northwest of it, in the central plain of the island, where these styles and types are more common. And then, looking at all the material from Ambelikou, we see that some separates out quite considerably. These are vessels of what we call drab polished ware, a very unfortunate name for this type of pottery. Drab polished ware is most common and most at home in the southwest of Cyprus, although a few items are found more widespread. Here we find them at Ambelikou. They must have been imported from outside. So although they're making pottery at Ambelikou, they're also importing pottery, even of very similar shapes, functional types, but made in a different fabric. We then have the majority of the pottery, including all our jugs, made and used, discarded or abandoned in that catastrophic event at Ambelikou. These are the local products. They are perhaps the finer vessels brought in from areas to the northwest, the centre of the island, and the drab polished wares coming from the southwest. So, the site then is not isolated. It's not only producing pottery for itself, but it's linked to other parts of the island. And this, of course, is no surprise because we've mentioned, but not discussed in detail, the copper production, the mining and processing. The copper was not all for local consumption by any means, but it too would have been distributed away from this village through intermediate communities in the centre of the island, perhaps to the north coast for transshipment abroad. So we can then see Ambelikou is part of a complex network of relationships. The artifacts that we have and that we can use to monitor this give us some insight into the networks of relationships linking different parts of the island. It's a complex set of community interactions. Now, unfortunately, and as you would know, Cyprus is politically divided and has been so for more than 40 years. It has not been possible for archaeologists to work in the northern part of Cyprus. It is not an integrated society, at least in the extent it was 4,000 years ago, or even more recently. But perhaps sometime, we hope in the not too distant future, the political conflicts will be resolved. It will be possible for archaeologists once again to work in the north of the island. And perhaps some archaeologist will go back to Ambelikou to work more at the site, to find out more about the workshops and perhaps more domestic aspects of the settlement, to put our pottery workshop into a broader context, to understand better the lives of the people living at this site some 4,000 years ago. No project in archaeology is an individual activity. There are always many, many people involved that need to be acknowledged and who contributed to this work. In this case, I would like to thank, among those many, especially my colleague Jenny Webb, but also others who've seen them on their work in this presentation. Rudy Frank taking the photographs, Wei Ming and Catherine Erickson drawing things, Alex Perrin, who produced that reconstruction. And of course to Robert Merrilees and Anne-Elizabeth Dunvaturi, generously giving us the basis on which to work. But there are institutional supporters, the Australian Research Council, La Trobe University, and the Shelby Whiteley and Levy Programme for Archaeological Publications, which provides resources to publish and to work up old excavations such as this one. And then the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus, who've looked after this material and continue to look after it, and who generously made it and facilities available to us.